Hi, this week we're going to talk about Module 9, which is about drugs. But I just wanted to take a moment and really just highlight the similarities and differences among the drugs. So I'm going to first talk about their similarities and then we'll just talk about their differences. First, I think it's important that we describe what a drug is or a psychoactive drug. And so your textbook describes it as a chemical substance that alters perceptions and moods. Psychoactive drugs can lead to what's called substance use disorders, where a person consistently craves the substance and uses it despite having significant life disruptions and or physical risks. One key concept in understanding drugs as well as its contribution to addiction is the concept of tolerance. This is basically where there's a diminishing effect with regular use of the same dose of the drug, which requires the user to take larger and larger doses before experiencing the drug's effect. So as we look at this particular graph, this kind of illustrates tolerance, right? So the first time a person takes it, they just need a small amount of the drug to really experience its effects. But as time goes on, they have to increase the doses of the drug in order to get the same effect as the initial exposure. And this is really due to what's called neuroadaptation. Neuroadaptation is basically where, with repeated administration of a drug, it leads to a compensating effect as the body, particularly the brain, attempts to maintain homeostasis. Homeostasis is just where the body and the brain always try to maintain a steady state. And so, to counteract these effects, the user must take larger quantities of the drug in order to achieve the initial drug effects. And this causes tolerance. So, again, neuroadaptation is just the user's brain chemistry adapting in order to offset the effects of the drug. Another key concept in relation to tolerance, and again highlights the similarities among all drugs, is the idea of what's called withdrawal. So after the substance wears off, and this is particularly true once tolerance has been established in the user, that the drug user might experience withdrawal symptoms after they stop taking the drug. And withdrawal symptoms are basically where the person is readjusting to the absence of the drug. And withdrawal usually worsens addiction because users want to resume taking the drug to end withdrawal symptoms and to feel better. One thing I also really wanted to highlight, and this actually was more discussed in Module 4 under the limbic system, particularly the hypothalamus, but they talk about what's called the pleasure pathway, this reward circuit. Basically, this pleasure pathway starts in this area in the midbrain called the ventral tegmental area, and it extends to the nucleus accumbens, which is in the limbic system, somewhat near the hypothalamus, and then eventually goes into the prefrontal cortex. And this pleasure pathway uses dopamine as its neurotransmitter. And one thing I do want to just highlight is that anytime you engage in any type of activity that allows you to feel pleasure, this pleasure center is activated and releases dopamine. So when I eat chocolate cake, or if I, receive praise from my adored professor, or if I have sex, or if I'm I'm a man and I see a very physically attractive woman, right? All of these things are going to cause dopamine to be released in this pleasure center. Importantly, all drugs of addiction cause this pleasure center to be stimulated and usually cause a flood of dopamine to occur in these areas. And the flood of dopamine is what causes you to feel that high from the drug. But unfortunately, over time, your body starts to do that neuroadaptation where it tries to heat off that flood of dopamine. And so those neurotransmitters start reducing in number. So here we have some PET scans of drug abusers of alcohol, methamphetamine, cocaine. Basically, PET scans illustrate brain activity. And so the red areas are where higher brain activity is occurring and yellow areas are less. And as you can see, there's less dopaminergic activity in drug abusers of alcohol, methamphetamine, cocaine than in their normal counterparts. And again, it goes to that whole neuroadaptation, that all that flooding of dopamine has caused that neuroadaptation to reduce the number of dopamine receptors, which again lends itself to tolerance, that the person has to ingest more of the drug to get that pleasure, and then also contributes to withdrawal, right? Because when they're not exposed to the drug, they feel probably lower, as a consequence of addiction to the drug. So we've focused on the similarities of the drug. I just want to mention that your book points out that there's three main categories of drugs. So there's what's called depressants. These drugs are chemicals that reduce neural activity and other body functions, so they kind of slow everything down. And so some common examples of this would be alcohol, barbiturates, like sleeping aids, opioids. Then there's, of course, stimulants, which are the opposite of depressants. So they intensify, speed up neural activity and bodily functions. So stimulants is basically where your sympathetic nervous system is kicked in, right? You've got this increase in breathing and heart rate, decrease in appetite, those kind of things. Some common stimulants are caffeine, nicotine, amphetamines and methamphetamines, cocaine, ecstasy. And then lastly, your book talks about what's called hallucinogens. Hallucinogens are drugs that distort perceptions and evoke sensory images in the absence of sensory input. So examples of this would be LSD as well as marijuana. Although marijuana, of course, is considered a mild hallucinogen. So more illustrations about the effects of these different types of drugs you can look at in the table in terms of the desired effects as well as adversive effects, which again kind of illustrate the differences among these different. So I just wanted to take a moment to kind of highlight again similarities and differences among different drugs. Thank you for listening.